Give it another 30 seconds. I have a couple more people that are joining. Okay, let's get this press conference started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sam Cole. I'm Traffic Safety Communications Manager at the Colorado Department of Transportation. This is a press conference to discuss the rise in traffic fatalities in Colorado. We are recording this press conference, and the recording will be included in a link in the press conference, in the press release that will follow this press conference. We have 3 speakers for the press conference. First speaker up will be Chief Matthew Packard, Chief of the Colorado State Patrol. The second speaker will be John Lorme with CDOT. He's the Director of Maintenance and Operations. And the third speaker will be Vincent Niski. He's the Chief at the Colorado Springs Police Department. I will put a fact sheet and a media kit in the chat for the media partners on this call to be able to click on and retrieve some information while they're listening to our speakers. With that, I think I'd like to turn it over to Chief Packard to get us started.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam, for the introduction and pulling this all together, and for all of our partners that are tuned in. Thank you very much for your coverage of something that is certainly something I'm very passionate about, and I think is really important for the safety of the people of Colorado, our folks that live here, but certainly those that travel through our state every day. I think that where I'd like to start is just an acknowledgement that in 2021, life was pretty hard for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. We had a lot of concerns that were on the plate for a lot of different, from a lot of different perspectives. And it would seem, at least from my perspective, that one of the most important things that we do, engage in safe transportation, safe traffic, has fallen off the radar. It's something that people are not giving the attention that it deserves, in my humble opinion. I'll tell you that I'll just tell you that a lot of people died in 2021. The numbers are still rolling in. You'll see on the VMS boards from our partners at CDOT, for example, the preliminary numbers of the lives lost. I will tell you that I fully expect that number to exceed 700 in 2021, that more than 700 people will have lost their lives on Colorado's roads in 2021. And that, I've spoken to you all before about how awful that number is. It's appalling to me to think that many people senselessly lose their lives in something that we do every day. In fact, I would offer to you that driving or transporting or moving around our state on our roadways is probably, unfortunately, one of the more dangerous things that people do, that Coloradans do every day. And because of that, it is so worthy of our focus and our attention to the risks that are at hand there. So, I'm stumbling for words because it's something that I've dedicated my professional life to, is ensuring traffic safety and making sure that folks have the opportunity to get home safely to their loved ones, to engage in our state's economy, to be productive members of our society. But we're just missing the boat. And I'll take some ownership of that from a law enforcement perspective. But really, one of the takeaways I'd like to leave with all of you is that your safety, our society's safety, is in each of our individual hands, and it's of our own responsibility. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what the State Patrol has done, how we closed out 2021 in recognizing the crisis that we are dealing with as it relates to traffic safety, how we're going to posture in 2022, and then from my perspective, what we need from the people of Colorado to drive that number down. The last time we saw more than 700 deaths on our roads was 2002. So, I mean, just give a little bit of perspective. We're at a 20-year high. And I think there's a lot of things that we could say are causing that. Your guess is as good as mine. I certainly know that law enforcement visibility is an effective deterrent to bad driving, and we need help. We can be more visible. But at the end of the day, this is a personal accountability solution that we can all engage in. Paying attention to our data in 2021, the patrol noticed a stark increase in fatalities over certain specific geographic areas as we do our operations. And in response to that, we surged enforcement operations, as many of you are well aware, into those specific areas, engaged in low tolerance enforcement and strict enforcement of those violations that we knew were causing the most crashes. Our initial report out is that was an effective deterrent to bad driving. And that's something that we would like to continue in 2022. But as if you were on the call earlier, you heard Chief Niski and I discussing manpower is a significant issue. And quite frankly, I'm not going to be able to have a trooper on every street corner, on every rural road, at every intersection to be that visual deterrent to bad driving. And what we're going to need is a true partnership with the people of Colorado to hold themselves accountable, to hold each other accountable, and to support our message, our important message of keeping Colorado safe from traffic crashes. We need to get that number below 700. It was not that long ago. In fact, in 2018, I was talking to the troopers across the state saying we are going to get that number below 600. And here we are entering 2022. So what I ask of all of you, and what I think is the most important, is to start speaking up and using your voice. Certainly, as you see people driving aggressively and dangerously, you can always use star CSP, star 277 to report those aggressive drivers. But again, I'll tell you, if I had 1,000 more troopers and could put them at every spot possible, it wouldn't be enough. So what it really comes down to is personal accountability and making sure that you're not putting your rush, your hurry, whatever you think is important at that moment above the safety of everybody else on Colorado's roads. I can't imagine having gone through just losing a loved one during a holiday season, and the patrol just lost a loved one for other reasons, and it's hard when you look back. We're losing people for things that are entirely preventable. I'm flummoxed, to say the best, and there's got to be something that we can do better. I will tell you that patrol will do our part. We will continue to engage in strict enforcement. But please continue to give this message. What we saw in 2021 is seatbelt usage went down. Impaired driving went up. We think distracted driving is going up with all the things going on. And these are easy solutions that people can just do some introspection and realize that your life is as equally as important as everybody else's. And when you make that selfish decision to get behind the wheel of a car while you're impaired, you're taking other people's lives into your hand needlessly. When you're picking up that distraction, the same thing. When you're driving aggressively, weaving in and out of traffic, passing on the shoulder, doing these types of behaviors, you are impacting far more than just your car. It is truly impacting everybody utilizing Colorado's roads. So we will be there. We will continue to engage in that strict enforcement, but we are looking for partners wherever we can find them. And I'll tell you that CDOT and Colorado Springs Police Department in particular have been wonderful partners in that regard. And I know, and you'll hear from them here in a moment, but we are aligned in the recognition of how important this is to the quality of life of people of Colorado everywhere. And I look forward to working with them and all of you and the people of Colorado to turning this boat around, turning this car around, if you will, to make 2022 a much more safer year on Colorado's roadways. So, Sam, thanks for the opportunity, and happy to turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Chief. We have John Lorme from the Colorado Department of Transportation up next.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Sam. Hello, my name is John Lorme. I'm the Director of Maintenance and Operations. And I can assure you as a Director of Maintenance Operations that we do everything that we possibly can do to make our roads safe as possible given our available resources. We put a tremendous effort from the department into maintaining a safe and reliable travel network. Drivers making poor decisions, whether it's speeding, driving impaired, not buckling up, and of course, distracted driving like the Chief just mentioned, especially using cell phones, has caused more than 90% of the crashes on our roadway. It has become our major problem, and it's not just as State Patrol and Colorado Department of Transportation, but as in everyone that lives and works and passes through Colorado. Last year was a bad year. Bad decisions cost 672 lives, and that number is probably going to continue to grow, like Chief Packard said. There's been more fatalities on our roads since any 1 year since 2002. That's almost 50% more roadway deaths than just 10 years ago. And it's not all related to people coming to Colorado, because our population has not increased 50% in 10 years. So, it's something that we need to step back and really kind of focus on. The disturbing trend actually began in 2020 when we saw a rise in traffic deaths, despite far fewer people on the roads for COVID. Most notably was a record number of fatal motorcycle crashes and a jump in extreme speeding cases, all of those reported by law enforcement. These crashes involved impaired driving also, which has been skyrocketing. For whatever reason, these reasons are unsafe. Driving behaviors carried over from 2020 to 2021, and now we're seeing it in 2022. Fatalities involving vehicle occupants have skyrocketed 22%. Most of these crashes involve people who aren't buckled up. However, there is some good news. Over the past year, over 200 lives were saved in Colorado just by using their seatbelt. But unfortunately, seatbelt use in Colorado kind of lags behind the national average. Also, more deaths could be prevented if people just wouldn't drive impaired. It's probably the simplest thing anybody can do when they're driving is drive with all their faculties. So fatalities involving impaired drivers increased about 16% over 2020 numbers. This issue on our roads affects both rural and urban areas alike. For example, our preliminary data indicates that fatalities in Pueblo County are up 37% and in Denver County, 29%. The State Patrol and our law enforcement partners are doing an amazing job trying to remove impaired drivers from the roadway before they can injure someone. They are truly saving lives every day and risking their own life to do so. However, law enforcement efforts can't do it alone. This problem can only be solved if we all participate in trying to find a reasonable solution. Drivers must do their part. We must recommit ourselves to safety. This includes buckling up, keeping our speeds down, staying off our phones, and never driving impaired. And lastly, just a little bit of courtesy to your fellow driver will go a long way out there and help ensure that we all make it home. Because 700 fatalities in 1 year in Colorado is just tragic. So, Sam, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, John. Our last speaker is Chief Niski from the Colorado Springs Police Department. Chief. Can't hear you if you're on mute.
Wanted to make sure you didn't pick up anything before.
There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Sam said, I'm Vince Niski, the Chief of the Colorado Springs Police Department. I want to thank CDOT and Chief Packard for the opportunity to speak today about this important topic. Actions to reduce traffic fatalities and traffic accidents have been a major focus for the Colorado Springs Police Department for many years. CSPD utilizes several different strategies to impact driving behavior. We regularly partner with our state and local agencies to engage in statewide campaigns to reduce speeding and DUIs. We have traffic officers, DUI officers, and motor unit officers dedicated to traffic safety who target identified problem areas within Colorado Springs with traffic enforcement. Monthly, the patrol division commanders have their officers addressing traffic issues in the top accident locations for their areas, as well as focusing on neighborhood complaints. We commit overtime dollars to traffic enforcement each year to ensure we have officers paying attention to our roadways. The city of Colorado Springs currently has 10 red light traffic cameras at problem intersections, and we'll be adding 10 additional red light cameras in the future to help us control and to monitor traffic issues. CSPD works with traffic engineering to address infrastructure issues that may contribute to crashes, as well as providing education about traffic safety through public safety announcements, press releases, and neighborhood watch meetings. With all this focus on reducing traffic crashes and traffic fatalities, in 2021, there were still 50 traffic fatalities in Colorado Springs. Of those fatalities, 18 involved cars alone, 15 involved motorcycles, 15 involved pedestrians, and 2 involved bicyclists. These fatalities occurred at different locations across the city and involved all ages of people from all walks of life. The only commonality is none of them thought they would be involved in a crash that day in which somebody would die. We have too many citizens losing their lives in preventable crashes. While CSPD officers will continue to engage in targeted traffic enforcement of dangerous traffic behaviors, such as speed and reckless driving, driving under the influence, and running red lights, this problem cannot be solved by law enforcement response alone. These tragic and senseless deaths affect everyone in our community, and it will take a community response to change what is happening. As Coloradoans, we need to slow down, follow the rules of the road, and drive safely. This means wearing your seatbelt and making sure your passengers are also wearing their seatbelts. It means putting down the cell phone and making sure you are paying attention to your driving and not being distracted by something else. It means that under no circumstance will you ever get behind the wheel while you are impaired. Always give yourself enough time to reach your destination safely. We need everyone to drive responsibly and look out for each other so that we can all make it home safely. Again, be courteous to each other. Be aware of your surroundings and take time when you're getting from one place to another. Thank you again for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief Niski, and your department's done an amazing job. It looks like you're one of the few cities or counties that has actually seen a reduction in traffic fatalities in 2021. Been very proactive, so it's nice to see that. I'm now going to open up the meeting, the press conference, to questions from the media. Anybody want to chime in or raise a hand or type something into chat?
Can I jump in?
Yep.
Bill here. So just last week, one of our people who monitors scanners heard somebody out on patrol, and I don't know if it was State Patrol or Springs PD going through Colorado Springs, and twice in the morning, people riding, one was over 100 miles an hour. Somebody was in the close to 100 in the 90s, I think. Is that what we're talking about when we're talking about, I mean, I think people think speeding and they're thinking, oh, you know, it's a 65 and they're going 75, or it's a 75 and they're going 85. Are we seeing ridiculous numbers on a regular basis?
Well, Bill, I can certainly take that from the State Patrol's perspective. And yes, is the short answer to your question. This morning, I had my weekly staff meeting with my command, and one of my majors was late to that meeting because he stopped a person in the gap going 107 miles an hour. And it was the second time that in that meeting where we had somebody talking about going 107 miles an hour. That's a problem that we see not only in the gap, but across this state and truly across the country, where what I would call extreme speeds are becoming more and more of a norm, and exceptionally dangerous behavior that really takes a lot of lives in the hands of that driver inappropriately, if I may be so bold. But it's not exclusively speed. That continues to be one of the top causal factors the patrol sees across the state. Impaired driving continues to kill an incredible amount of people, accounting for about 30% on average year over year. That number is going up in 2021 based on our initial data. But between speed, lane violations, and impaired drivers, if we could figure out how to get people to take responsibility to solve those problems, we would save quite literally hundreds of lives.
Okay, we've actually, we have 3 hands up. Heidi Beadle.
Hi, Chief Niski. I reported recently about how the previous year's traffic deaths in Colorado Springs, 10 of the 25 most dangerous intersections were located in Southeast Colorado Springs in 80910 and 80916. And a lot of that, you know, one of the contributing factors was kind of like a lack of infrastructure, like stoplights and things like that. And I'm just kind of curious, in 2021, did that trend continue? And to what extent did those sort of dangerous intersections play a role in the 2021 numbers?
Well, our dangerous intersections change from year to year. We base all of our intersections based on traffic data. So it's not just based on fatalities, it's based on crashes as a whole. The number of crashes, number of fatalities, number of injury accidents. When you say that you did a story about red lights and the lack of red lights, we work very, very closely with the traffic engineer's office here in Colorado Springs. Our officers are very well trained that if they see an infrastructure issue, that they reach out to the traffic engineer's office, they bring it to their attention, but we don't make those decisions. We're not the ones that decide where stop signs go, where lights go. It's the traffic engineer's office, and they do an outstanding job here listening to our recommendations. This year, 2021 was a tragic year, but it was a tragic year across the city. I think the majority of our fatality accidents happened just south here of the POC at Las Vegas and Nevada, where we have a lot of transient people that are crossing the roadways without paying attention. So while we talk about traffic crashes being the driver's responsibility, it's also the pedestrian's responsibility. Every fatality that we had, I believe last year, that involved a pedestrian, the pedestrian was either crossing against a light, crossing mid-block in the dark, wasn't wearing reflective clothing. There was a part that they had to play in that accident themselves that we're asking everyone to pay attention to their surroundings, be cognizant of your surroundings, and make sure you're traveling and following the rules of the road.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up, Brandon Thompson.
Hi there, and Sam, if you have those numbers in the release that shows the decrease here in our community, that'd be super helpful. Just kind of a question to both Chief Packard and Chief Nitsky. I don't want to understate the role of personal responsibility here, but you guys both touched on staffing. And Chief Nitsky, we talked a couple months ago about the staffing problems in the traffic enforcement department. So can you guys just dive into that a little bit more? How much how far behind are you guys with the traffic, or at least in CSPD's realm, with the traffic department staffing?
Well, quite honestly, our staffing across the board is down significantly. Our motor unit, which does a lot of traffic enforcement for Colorado Springs, is down 6 officers right now. We can't fill those positions until we get our staffing back up. In 2020 and 2021, I provided each of our patrol divisions and our traffic unit kind of a $20,000 overtime stipend, I guess, to go out and just do traffic enforcement, to do additional on top of what they were doing with their officers. This year, I'm setting aside $150,000 citywide of overtime money. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it does go a long way when we use it strategically. We've assigned one lieutenant to manage that fund, to direct both patrol officers and motor officers in the direction on where to go and how to use those dollars so that we get the best leverage of that money. We're hoping that our staffing, we have a class right now, 69. Once that class gets out, that we can go ahead and, when they're out on their own, that we can go ahead and beef up our resources in the motor unit and in the patrol division so that we are doing more traffic enforcement. It is a priority, though. Even though our staffing is low, our ticket count was actually up last year over 2020, and it was significant. So we are doing enforcement. We are doing the things that we need to do. I think education is another big piece of what we do to help the community understand. We try to do a lot with our school resource officers in the schools, especially the high schools, to start training people young that traffic safety is an individual responsibility, not just a law enforcement responsibility.
I guess I can build on Chief Nitsky's comments there. Like so many agencies right now across the country, the patrol is also hurting with our staffing. Something that we're working on. We've got 2 academy classes running right now with a plan to start another class in the fall. So we're looking for the biggest and brightest, as is Chief Nitsky is. We're all competing for the same folks to make sure that we have the most professional, highest quality law enforcement officers out there on the street doing this important function for the people of Colorado. I'll tell you from the patrol's perspective, we're fortunate in the sense that traffic safety is our primary mission. So that's where we make sure that's our core, and we will always strive to staff those positions first, and to make sure that we are out there being visible to keep people safe on Colorado's roads. At the core, we need to be able to respond to traffic crashes and be able to, answer that call, so to speak, when people call for our help. But when we have the opportunity to be proactive, we are becoming increasingly data driven. so that we can focus our efforts with the limited resources that we have in the places that we know are causing or having the most crashes, and then focusing on those violations that we know are the most dangerous and most likely to hurt or kill people on Colorado's roads. So it's difficult to say that in the context of a crash can quite literally happen anywhere. Someone's not paying appropriate attention. And again, I can't have a trooper in all of those places when you're responsible for every unincorporated road in the state. That's a lot of lane miles to handle. And I know you mentioned it in the question, but really our best avenue for success is to have people accept their role in being responsible in driving on Colorado's roads. So any help you can give us to get that message out, we'll certainly take.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that answer. And just Chief Nitsky, another question for you. You mentioned doubling the amount of red light cameras. Do you think that what's been rolled out so far has been a success for the city?
I think it has been. I think we have seen some decreases in the amount of red light running in those intersections. I'm not going to say they were all great intersections up front, but they have had a role in reducing the number of traffic accidents at those intersections. So I do think it's positive. We do a lot of work internally and with our vendor to identify those locations. I know there's a lot of perception that these are revenue generators. I guess I'd like to address that across the board. Citations and red light camera tickets are not revenue generators. They are ways to get a message out to our public that you need to drive more safely. And it really is. And I'd like to go back to your other question real quick, and the question that Bill had about speeding. I think another important issue to realize is we collaborate with our local partners as well whenever we do a lot of our deployments. It's not just CSPD by themselves. We collaborate with Colorado State Patrol, with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, with the Fountain Police Department, especially when we hit the highway to try to do enforcement. We will do the enforcement from the north end of El Paso County to the south end on I-25 just to get the message out that those 100-mile-an-hour speed limits are not acceptable. They're not acceptable at all. So we don't do this alone. We do this in collaboration with a lot of other departments across our communities.
Great, thank you, Chief. We got 3 more questions in the people with their hand raised. Elise, go ahead. Elise, did you have a question? If so, we can't hear you. Okay. Let's move on to the next raised hand, DJ Summers.
Hi, Chief Packard. I mean, we're talking about staffing issues. Would you describe those more as budgetary, or is it a problem of recruitment and retention?
I would not say at this point it's budgetary. I do think it's a recruiting and retention problem, opportunity for us to get better. But there's a lot of people leaving the profession right now, and it takes a long time for us to get people in. Obviously, we're pretty nitpicky about who we bring into our organizations, and there's a pretty extensive training lift that goes into that. So we're struggling to keep up with that right now. But budget-wise, and I can only speak for the patrol, we're supported very well by the legislature and the governor's office, and we're just working to get those people out there on the road.
Thank you.
The next person, I think we have one more person with their hand up.
This is Ron Milhorn from KMTS in Glenwood Springs. Chief Packard, what kind of issues are you seeing or hearing about on the Western Slope? As you know, we have our share of challenges, as natural disasters and accidents. Of course, it shut down I-70. What are you seeing on the West Slope?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. So in fact, I recall listening to the radio on Christmas morning about a snowstorm in Grand Junction in Mesa County where our troopers in that area were responding to crash after crash. And certainly on the I-70 corridor, we had a I think back-to-back days where we had multi-car pileups within the Glenwood Canyon, where we struggled and the road was closed for a significant amount of time. Not to mention all the natural disasters that CDOT has been incredible in responding to as well. But to speak to the root of the question, the causal factors, the things that we see causing crashes are pretty consistent across the state. Throughout it, we see lane violations that's behavior that's indicative of, quite frankly, inattentive to driving, potentially people making bad passes, people that are impaired, people holding their cell phones, people are exceeding a safe speed where they end up crossing into the adjacent lane because they can't maintain their own lane, and these things piggyback on each other. So speed has been for decades a leading causal factor. Not to be lighthearted about it, but we have a beautiful state, particularly on the western slope, and it's really hard to see when you're going too fast. So if just people can be responsible and abide by those speed limits that CDOT works so hard to pick the right number to do it safely, but certainly impaired driving continues to be across the board. Just looking at our data for our initial crashes in the last couple of weeks, starting off 2022, for example, a suspected impaired driving fatality on Highway 82 near Independence Pass, not quite on the top of the pass, but can you imagine making a decision to drive impaired going over that mountain on that part of the state? It's mind-boggling to me. And I can only assume it's a lack of understanding and awareness of the dangers of that type of behavior. So if you're going to drive, if you're going to get impaired, whether it be from alcohol or marijuana or something else, at the least you could do in consideration of everybody else is to have a plan on how you're going to get home or where you're going to sleep that afternoon, that evening, before you start to engage in that behavior. Because we all enjoy watching the game, having a good time with our friends and family, but that quickly changes when you make that awful and selfish decision to get behind the wheel.
Okay, Elise actually had a problem with her audio. She has a question that she put in chat. Her two questions are, and this is statewide, which intersections or stretches of highway were particularly problematic for fatal crashes last year? I think that would go to the Chief Packard. Have these spots been problems for years now, or is this something new? That's her first question. We'll let you handle it.
Yeah, Elise, I appreciate the question. And so we can get you more specific data, and then certainly in partnership with CDOT, the patrol has data that is pretty strong with the portions of roads that we cover primarily, but certainly CDOT has some great statewide data that we can share. I'll just tell you that particularly in the end of 2021, one of the things that we looked at was the change in fatality rate in 2021 as compared to the 5-year average. That seems to be a pretty good metric for us to use. And what we saw was I-25 in Douglas County saw a pretty significant increase. So that's why we focused in there. The I-70 corridor also from essentially the tunnel west into the Glenwood Canyon area. We also saw significant troubles as well. Southwest Colorado, the 160 corridor, Highway 550, and then also I-76 in the northeast. And so what you heard me say was a lot of interstates. In fact, the major interstates, those are the major traffic areas in our state. But it's truly a statewide problem. We have some areas where we've been successful. Weld County, of all places, Weld County historically has been a high fatality rate county for the state of Colorado, but we've made a positive change there in partnership, as Chief Niski talked about, working closely with the sheriff's office there and the local police departments and CDOT to really do a 360-degree approach into preventing traffic. It's not just enforcement, it's education, like Chief Niski talked about. But it really is a statewide area. But we're seeing certainly the urban areas where there is, I would say, the traffic volume is returning. We're seeing and also a stark increase in traffic fatalities as well.
And she also wonders about street racing. How many fatalities can be tied to street racing? Any comment on that? I know we've had a problem with that in Colorado Springs, Chief.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. I don't know that we've had any fatalities associated with street racing that I'm aware of. I can get that if we do have it. Street racing, though, is a problem. We have a lot of roadways. We have Academy Boulevard. We have Powers. We have a lot of other roadways where they're open, and we do see a lot of street racing. We actually do street racing deployments in the spring and summer to impact those. We've actually added some new legislation, local ordinance, to where we can seize cars on the second time that we identified them as being involved in street racing. We can actually seize those cars and try to take them away from the lawful owner. So we are taking steps, but it is a continued problem. It really is. It's really difficult for us to do it with the officers we have out there. That's why we do specialized deployments, throughout the year.
I can echo that as well. The patrol works with a lot of our local partners, the cities and the county sheriffs, a lot in the metro area, and in Springs is El Paso County as well, the Denver metro area, I should say. It's a challenging issue to address. I don't have the data on the top of my head about the number of street racing attributable fatal crashes that we had this year, but it was more than one, which is too many. But that is an area of emphasis for the patrol and a continued point of emphasis and when we engage in partner operations with local and county law enforcement across the state.
Great, thanks. And Chief Packard, you also mentioned some success that we're having in Weld County, and just looking at the data, we did see a decrease in the number of fatalities in Weld County from 54 in 2020 to 46 in 2021. So our efforts there are really paying off. That's almost a 10% decrease. Brandon, you had another question?
Yeah, it just is obvious here that there are multiple factors that are going into this, whether it's speed, seatbelts, personal responsibility being chief among those. But I just wondered, just what role does the capacity of Colorado's roads have? I mean, John, you mentioned the growth in the state, and not that the growth is keeping up with the growth in traffic fatalities that you mentioned, but just that Colorado's roads, a lot of people don't feel like they're efficient. So is road rage and frustration and that kind of thing from not having enough lane miles play a role into some of this?
Well, that's an amazing question, and one I don't think I'm really qualified to answer. Our traffic engineers and our regional directors would have better, or at least more concrete data that they could provide you. I can tell you right now, our roadways, the capacity in some areas is stretched. We have some pinch points as you're driving through some metro areas, but generally throughout the whole state, our transportation system is basically almost a victim of our topography, if you will. Trying to drive from one side of our state to the other is very restricted. I-70 through Glenwood Canyon, as has been mentioned on the call a couple times, is very restricted. There's no bypass routes for it because of the terrain. I think if we had unlimited resources, we could address those problems in the future. But right now, I think the system can handle the current load. And then our Transportation Commission and the state legislature are working on ways to make the system even more efficient. And then people like me will do our best to maintain it. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but we can definitely get you some better data for sure. And I can work with Sam to get that to you.
Or something along the lines of road rage. Is that something that you guys are seeing in CSPD or CSP?
Yeah, we continue to, the State Patrol's perspective, we continue to see instances of road rage. And obviously the more egregious situations to go violent catch the headlines at times, but I'll tell you, you can see instances of road rage that results in crash nearly every single day. You see people, as I'm trying to drive around the state, you see people making aggressive lane changes, doing things like brake checks, even hand gestures and those types of things. And those are all behaviors that are not indicative of safe and responsible driving. And just like you learned when you were in grade school, your best option is not to heighten the aggression or heighten the anger that's involved in the situation, but find a way to decrease that. And it's really convenient when you're in your car because you can just slow down, move over, and let the problem go on down the road. And you can always pull over, call 911 or call Star CSP 911, certainly in an emergency situation. But maybe it's a comment, Brandon, on where we are as a society right now, but people seem to have a short fuse, and that is absolutely, we're seeing that come across on Colorado's roadways as well. And it would be really helpful if folks could take a deep breath as well and let those problems go on down the road, because you gain nothing by engaging in that type of an argument while you're on the road going 65 miles an hour or greater.
And I'll just say, Brandon, I think it's interesting that in 2020, we saw far fewer people on the road. Roads were fairly wide open, yet we saw traffic fatalities increase. So I think that if you gave everybody what they wanted in their roads, you would still see these bad behaviors happen out there.
Good. Thank you so much.
So we have a question from Cora Dickey. Cora from KREX and 5 in Grand Junction. I've covered multiple accidents caused by different factors, including the November 27th 2-vehicle collision that closed I-70 for hours and injured 3 people. With the high amount of crashes and fatalities in Colorado, is or will there be discussion on increasing fines as an indirect enforcement and encouragement for safe driving? So are fines going up?
Well, Sam, I can take that from the state's perspective. Obviously, in Colorado, local jurisdictions have the ability to kind of do their own fine structure. For the patrol, the fine structure that we have is set by the legislature. And it's a conversation that we have regularly at each General Assembly. As you know, we're just kicking that off this year. And I'm not aware of any particular legislation at this point talking about addressing the fine issue in particular. But you know what, I'll tell you, I stopped a lot of cars in my career, and the fine is part of that. And certainly having a consequence is an important deterrent to this bad behavior. But man, if 700 lives lost isn't a compelling statement, I don't know what is. And while enforcement will continue and will always be an important tool in our toolbox, if you will, to encourage safe driving, outreach, education, and a narrative that continues to stress the importance of safe driving, I think, is our best bet. And the patrol will continue to primarily invest in enforcement, but we will also invest in our outreach efforts to help share that message. Because perhaps it sounds cliche, but if I'm doing my job right, and our troopers don't write a single ticket, right, because everybody's doing this on their own. I don't think that's in our immediate future. And as I said before, we will continue to be strict enforcers of the law and those violations that cause the most crashes. But it can't just be enforcement, I guess, is the message I want to be clear.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Olivia Pretzel has a question, and sorry, I messed up your pronunciation of your last name, but what percentage of last year's traffic fatalities across the state involved pedestrians? How does that compare to previous years? And I do have the data right in front of me. Last year, pedestrians were about 13% of all fatalities in the state. That is down slightly from the year before, which is good news. The other most vulnerable roadway users include motorcyclists. They comprised about 20% of our traffic deaths on our roadways. They were down slightly also last year. And then bicycles, that's about 2% of the fatalities that we've seen on the road. 15 deaths for bicycles, 130 for motorcycles. And for pedestrians, it was 87 in 2021. Other questions? Yeah, one from CPR. Question for CDOT. It seems like the solutions being presented are aimed at increasing personal responsibility. Yes, we've heard that come up a lot. But transportation advocates say increased access to public transit, like buses and trains, would prevent more deaths and injuries. Can CDOT comment on that perspective?
So I can tell you from CDOT, and again, I'm not the right person to answer transit questions. We do have a division of transit rail, and their job is to plan developing, operating an integrated transit system within our statewide transportation system. So I know CDOT knows that we can't grow out of this problem. One of the ways that we can is to increase transit availability to everybody within the state. So I do know our executive director and the state transportation commission, along with all of our partners out there and in the counties and the regional transportation planning groups, are all working to find better ways to make transit available to the general public wherever you may live. So, and again, like CDOT has bus staying, so we run our own bus service through CDOT. We have snow staying to help with traffic and ski traffic on the weekends. along with the rail systems as well. So we're doing whatever we can. Unfortunately, it's a pretty big ship, and investing in transit and rail is very, very costly. So we have to manage that and manage the system that we have now with the limited resources we have. So not sure if that answers your question, but it is a priority for us, I can tell you that.
Mhm. Yep, and mass transit any given day of the week is always going to be far safer than your individual car. If you wanted to do a deep dive into that story, CPR folks, let me know. I can find a person for you at CDOT to comment on that. But no, John summed it up really well. Other questions? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or any other hands raised. Elise, I assume you don't. Do you have any other questions? I see your hand up. I don't know if that was old though. Okay. Good. Well, I think that concludes our press conference. Looks like one hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sam, I'd just like to just reiterate, because it's been said that, Chief Packard, John, and I have said that driving is a personal responsibility. It is. If you look at all the causations we've talked about today that cause accidents, those are personal choices. It's not infrastructure. A lot of it's not infrastructure. A lot of it's not about public transit. It is about a personal choice to run a red light. It's about a personal choice to drive 100 miles an hour down a roadway. It's a personal choice to run a stop sign and crash into another vehicle. So I just want to reiterate, I know Chief Packard and I have said that numerous times, but we really are looking for voluntary compliance for rules of the road. That's our goal. That's what enforcement is about. Chief Packard would probably love not to have a job and not have to enforce traffic laws across the state. I would love to get rid of my motor unit and not do traffic enforcement and put them out in patrol. It's a personal choice. We're just asking for people to be more aware of what they're doing when they're driving and make the right choice while they're driving.
Yep, and CDOT is going to be investing over $2 million in the coming year on a public awareness campaign to remind people about those options, about the importance of driving safely, staying off their phone, buckling up, never driving impaired. Those are going to be in the form of public service announcements as well as partnerships with the news media like yourselves. We also are giving grants to local nonprofits that know their communities best, who will then push out traffic safety messages and try to urge people to drive safer in their local communities. I think you can expect more of our digital message signs on our roadways to be reminding people about the importance of safe driving. So I think all these things together, along with law enforcement, along with safer designed roads, given our budget, hopefully will lead to better outcomes in 2022. Chief, was there anything else, Chief Packard, anything else you wanted to say, or John, before we wrap up?
I'll just echo Chief Niski's comments and appreciate truly a sincere thank you to the media that's covering this story and helps continue to spread this message. Over the years, I've come before you and pounded my fist and talked about strict enforcement and all the things that we're going to do with that type of a tool. And I just hope what's coming clear today is this is a crisis in our state. This is a crisis that we're dealing across the country and increased traffic fatalities. And I don't use that term lightly, especially given the context of today. But look across this country, look across the things that we cover and find somewhere where we lose 700 people in a year that doesn't rise to the top of our concern. So it's worthy of our effort. It's certainly worthy of your coverage. And I would offer the patrol anywhere in this state, every corner, the opportunity to stand with you and help spread this message of how important this is. This comes down to the quality of life for the people that live here in Colorado. It's your lasting life, your ability to enjoy everything the state has to offer. It's your ability and that of your family to participate in our economy and all the fun things that happen here. It's really that simple. And it's something that I deeply, deeply care about. And even if you're not worried for some unknown reason about what's risk of your life and limb, It's congestion. It's all those things when you crash or when somebody is crashed and engaged in that slows you down getting to where you want to go. And in fact, that makes it less safe for the people in the traffic backup for you. The increases the likelihood of crashes. And of course, the patrol has invested significantly in reducing secondary crashes and protecting our first responders as they're out there truly working for you, working to make Colorado roads safer. So this is an easy solution. In fact, of all the complex problems that we deal with, this is among those, but it has an incredibly easy solution. And if we just take a minute to think about what's at risk and what's at stake, it seems like a no-brainer to me to just slow down, be attentive, and drive safely, because your life and your neighbors are what's at stake. So a sincere appreciation, and I pledge the patrol's partnership to every law enforcement agency, to CDOT, and to certainly the media and our communities across to accomplish this goal. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap up the press conference. Greg, I think your comment here about the RTD Broncos ride being canceled, I don't know anything about that, but let me see if I can find somebody from RTD to comment on that for you. Anybody can go ahead and just email me, sam.cole, C-O-L-E, at state.co.us. I'll put it in chat. Otherwise, you will be receiving a press release within the next hour with this recording of this, as well as a link to all the data. So thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sam.
Everybody.